Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm so glad you're here for today's story because, well, let's just say this one's going to leave you questioning your neighbors. So grab a snack, lock the doors, and let's dive right into this. Let me take you to a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where nothing ever really happens. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest drama is Mrs. Thompson's overgrown hedges. It's the kind of place where the sounds of birds chirping and kids playing are the norm. Everything is peaceful, almost too peaceful. And in the middle of it all, there's Jason. Now, Jason isn't the kind of guy who stands out, at least not at first. He lives alone in an apartment building that's been around for decades. He's a bit of a loner, but nothing too weird about that. In fact, he blends in. He works from home, keeps to himself, and doesn't really interact with anyone. Most people don't even know much about him. He's polite, always gives a small wave when he sees neighbors outside, but that's about it. But here's where it gets a little strange. Jason never leaves his apartment during the day. Ever. He doesn't walk his dog like everyone else. He doesn't run errands or even go to the grocery store like the rest of the neighborhood. The only time he's ever seen outside is late at night, when the world is asleep. And even then, it's like he's avoiding eye contact, keeping his head down and always hurrying back inside. The neighbors don't talk about him much, but they notice. They notice the little things, how his windows are always shut even when the sun is blazing outside, how he seems to always be inside, like he's trapped in his own home. But that's all. Nothing suspicious. Or so they thought. All right. Welcome back. By now, you're probably starting to get a little curious about Jason, right? But here's the thing. There's always more than meets the eye, and that's exactly what the neighbors started realizing. Let's talk about Sarah for a second. She's a single mom, living just across the hall from Jason. She's got a little girl named Lily, who's around 7 or 8, full of energy and always running around. Sarah's a friendly woman, always busy, always looking out for her daughter. She's the kind of person who notices the small details, and Sarah noticed Jason. At first, it wasn't anything serious, just little things like how he never had visitors. No family, no friends, no one really coming over. Everyone else in the building had people dropping by now and then, but Jason, it was like he was a ghost, always inside, never interacting with anyone. That's fine, right? Lots of people are loners, but there was something else that started to feel off. It started with the noise. Around midnight, sometimes later, Sarah would hear loud banging noises from Jason's apartment. It was muffled, like furniture being tossed around or something heavy being dragged across the floor. The first time it happened, Sarah chalked it up to the old building settling. But it wasn't just once. It was almost every night, at odd hours, like Jason was going through some kind of ritual. Sarah tried not to think about it too much. After all, it wasn't like she could just knock on his door and ask him what was going on. But then, things started getting weirder. One night, Sarah saw Jason coming out of his apartment, looking oddly disheveled. His hair was a mess, his clothes rumpled, like he hadn't been sleeping, or maybe like he was in a hurry. He didn't seem to notice her when she waved, his gaze fixed on the ground as he rushed out of the building. He wasn't carrying anything. No bags, no groceries. Just looking off. It was after that when Lily, Sarah's daughter, started mentioning something strange. Lily wasn't like other kids. She had a pretty good imagination, sure, but she was also really observant for her age. One day, as Sarah was getting dinner ready, Lily casually mentioned, "Mom, I don't like going near Jason's apartment anymore." When Sarah asked why, Lily said, "It smells weird, like something's burning or rotting." Sarah didn't think much of it at first. Kids say weird things all the time, right? But when Sarah walked past Jason's door a few days later, she smelled it too. It wasn't strong, but it was there. A metallic, almost putrid smell, like something decaying. That's when the whispers started. The neighbors began talking behind closed doors. Everyone had noticed Jason's odd behavior, but no one could put their finger on what it meant. Some thought maybe he was just eccentric. Others figured he was just one of those people who preferred solitude. But the smell, the banging noises, the strange hours, it was all starting to add up. They started wondering, what's really going on in there? But no one wanted to get involved. After all, Jason was quiet, never caused trouble, until he did. Still, no one dared to do anything concrete. No one wanted to be the one to accuse him of something when they didn't have proof. But sometimes, all it takes is one small thing to tip the balance. And soon, Jason's neighbors would be faced with something far darker than they could have ever imagined. It was a sunny afternoon when Sarah first realized something was wrong. She had been busy with laundry, tidying up the apartment, and keeping Lily entertained with some arts and crafts in the living room. But after a while, Sarah noticed the house was eerily quiet. Lily had wandered off into the building's hallway to play with some other kids, but hours had passed and Sarah hadn't heard a peep from her daughter. Maybe she's just playing with the neighbor's kids, Sarah thought, but a knot began to form in her stomach. She tried calling Lily's name from the window, but there was no answer. That's when Sarah went into full panic mode. She rushed out of her apartment, checking the hallway, knocking on doors, asking anyone if they'd seen Lily. No one had. The building was silent, too silent. Panic clawed at her chest as she moved down the stairs, heart racing. She knocked on every door she could find, asking anyone and everyone if they'd seen her little girl. "Have you seen Lily? Have you seen my daughter?" she asked, voice trembling with fear. But no one had seen Lily. By now, the whole building was in chaos. Neighbors started to gather, murmuring, sharing what little information they had. But none of them had seen her either. Lily wasn't in the park, she wasn't in the common areas, and she hadn't shown up at any of her friends' homes. That's when someone mentioned it. "I saw her earlier today," one of the neighbors said, their voice soft as if they were afraid to say it out loud. "She was talking to Jason, out by the door." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Lily was friendly, always talking to people. But this was different. Jason was never seen outside of his apartment unless it was the dead of night. And Lily, well, she had been saying things about his apartment recently. Now, there was a sickening feeling that hit Sarah like a freight train. It was as if every piece of the puzzle was suddenly falling into place, but there was still no evidence. No concrete proof that Jason had anything to do with Lily's disappearance. Everyone thought maybe she just wandered off, maybe gone to one of the nearby parks. But deep down, Sarah felt the terror gnawing at her, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. She needed answers, but she had no idea what kind of answers she was about to find. Sarah couldn't sit still any longer. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, and the more she thought about it, the more Jason's strange behavior seemed to tie into Lily's disappearance. The whispers about him, the smell, the noises, it was too much of a coincidence. She had to know for sure. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah walked to Jason's apartment door, trying to steady her breath. She knocked a few times, each knock feeling louder than the last. Knock, 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 no answer. She knocked again, nothing. A chill ran up her spine, but she pressed her ear to the door. Silence. Her hand trembled as she pulled it away, considering what to do next. She was a mother, terrified for her daughter, and there was no way she was leaving without some kind of answer. If Jason was hiding something, she needed to find it. She pulled out her phone, snapping a quick picture of the door in case anything went wrong. And then, without hesitating, she turned the knob. To her surprise, it was unlocked. Her heart dropped into her stomach, but there was no going back now. The apartment smelled different than it had before, thick, almost like dampness, mixed with something metallic. Sarah's stomach turned, but she forced herself to step inside, her shoes making soft echoes in the empty space. She could feel her pulse racing as she scanned the apartment, looking for any sign of what might be happening inside. The living room was bare, the furniture sparsely placed, nothing out of the ordinary, but the air, it felt heavy, like it was pressing against her chest. She moved quietly, cautiously through the narrow hallway to the kitchen, and that's when she saw it. There were stains on the floor. They were dark and blotchy, almost unrecognizable. She crouched down to take a closer look, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just dirt or spilled food. This was something else. The stains were too specific, too unnatural. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what it could be. Blood? But how? Her hand went to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The smell was stronger now, and as she backed away from the stain, she could taste it in the back of her throat. A bitter, iron-like tang. Sarah's eyes darted around the apartment, every shadow suddenly feeling like a potential threat. Then she heard it, a faint thud. It came from below the apartment. She froze, her breath hitching. It wasn't loud enough to be someone walking around, but there was something about it, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was like the sound of something heavy being moved, but far too soft, too muffled. Thud, thud, thud. Her body went rigid as she slowly followed the sound, moving toward a door that she hadn't noticed before. It was small and tucked away at the end of the hall, hidden behind a heavy curtain. The noise seemed to be coming from below, as though it was seeping through the floorboards. A wave of dread washed over Sarah, and every instinct in her told her to run. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had to know what was happening. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, the metallic smell growing stronger with each passing second. With one last, hesitant breath, she twisted the knob and stepped into the darkness. Sarah's breath quickened as she moved through the darkened hallway. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. But she pressed on. The noises from below were unmistakable now. The thuds, the scraping, the eerie, muffled cries. There was no mistaking it. They were coming from the building's basement. But no one really talked about the basement in this building. It wasn't a place people went. In fact, it was mostly forgotten. A dank, dark space that had long been abandoned by most of the tenants. Sarah had never seen it, never had any reason to. But tonight, everything was different. The sound of the cries became louder the closer she got to the basement door, and she felt the weight of the air pressing against her as if it was trying to hold her back. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the stairs that led down into the depths. She swallowed hard and clicked on her phone's flashlight, the beam flickering weakly as she stepped down into the unknown. The basement smelled worse than the apartment. Damp, cold, and something else. The stench of decay hit her like a wall, making her stomach churn. She hesitated for just a moment, but then the muffled cries echoed again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of chains rattling. Her blood ran cold. Chains. Was someone trapped down here? Was this where Jason kept his secrets? The basement was a maze of old, rusted equipment, forgotten boxes, and shelves that hadn't seen the light of day in years. It was dark, and the flashlight beam only illuminated small sections of the space, making the shadows seem that much deeper. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet made her jump. She was trying to stay quiet to make sure Jason didn't know she was there, but the noise from below made it almost impossible to stay composed. As she neared the far end of the basement, the cries became clearer, sharp, desperate. Lily. The sound twisted in Sarah's gut. She had to be getting close. And then she saw it. A door. A locked door, tucked into the farthest corner of the basement. The rusted metal door was barely visible under a pile of old junk, but there was no mistaking the strange scratching sounds coming from behind it. Soft, desperate sounds like someone or something was trying to break free. Sarah's heart leapt in her throat. She had to get in. She rushed over to the door, but it was locked tight. The rust around the lock made it look like it hadn't been opened in years. Sarah's mind raced. There was no way she was leaving without getting answers. She searched around the basement, her hands shaking as she rifled through old tools and garbage. Finally, she found what she was looking for. A crowbar, rusted and old, but it would work. She gripped it tightly, pulling the heavy tool toward the door, wedging it into the lock. She could feel her hands slipping as the crowbar resisted, but with a grunt of effort, she forced it into the crack, prying the lock open. The moment the door clicked, she didn't hesitate. She pushed it open, and the sight inside was beyond anything she could have imagined. The room was dark, the air thick and musty, but as her flashlight swept across the space, it landed on something that made her blood freeze. There in the far corner was Lily. The little girl was tied up, bruised and terrified, her face streaked with tears. She was shaking, her body barely able to hold itself up, chained to the wall. The moment Sarah's eyes met Lily's, the girl's voice broke through the silence with a hoarse cry, her desperate whisper filling the room. "Mom, help, please." Terror surged through Sarah's veins, but she didn't move. She couldn't move. Her legs were like jelly, her body frozen in place by the horrifying reality in front of her. Lily was alive, but barely. The soft clink of chains echoed through the basement as Sarah stepped forward, her mind racing. She had to get her out of here now, but even as she reached for the girl, she knew it was far from over. Something else was lurking in the shadows, something much, much darker. As Sarah rushed toward Lily, trying to untie the chains with trembling hands, she heard it. The soft scrape of shoes on the cold concrete floor. A low, guttural chuckle followed, and her blood ran cold. She froze. Jason was standing in the doorway, but there was something wrong about him. His eyes were wide, but they lacked any trace of remorse. They were empty, dark, void of any humanity. The way he stood, so unnaturally still, made him look almost predatory. He didn't even flinch when he saw Sarah, didn't seem surprised that she'd found him. Instead, he smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that sent a chill up Sarah's spine. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said, his voice soft, almost amused. Jason's smell hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just the metallic stench of blood anymore, it was something more feral, something that made her stomach turn. The smell of decay and rot, mixed with the unmistakable scent of human fear. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for her phone, her only means of defense, but it felt useless now. Jason was in control. "What? What have you done?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaky yet firm. Jason tilted his head to the side as if considering the question. Then, without missing a beat, he stepped into the room, his movements slow, deliberate. His eyes locked onto Lily, and Sarah felt a cold, horrible realization settle in her chest. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't afraid of anything. "I've been eating human flesh for years," Jason said casually, as if he were talking about something completely normal. "And not just for the taste. No. You see, it's not about hunger. It's about the fear, the suffering. There's a special kind of flavor that comes from the terror in their eyes, from the way their bodies react to the knowledge that they're about to die." Sarah's knees buckled. The words seemed impossible. She couldn't comprehend them, couldn't understand how this man, this neighbor, had been hiding such a monstrous secret in plain sight. Jason continued, as if he were discussing his favorite TV show. "It's the adrenaline, you know? The fear makes the meat taste better. People don't realize just how much the mind controls the body, especially when it's stressed." He smiled again, that sickening grin never leaving his face. "It's an art, really, getting them scared enough to make it just perfect." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned her head to Lily. The little girl's eyes were wide, her face pale, tears still streaking down her cheeks. Her legs were trembling, chained to the wall. She was trapped in Jason's nightmare, and Sarah was the only one who could get her out. But then, Jason's voice sliced through the thick silence again. "You think this is bad? Oh, Sarah, you have no idea. You're not the first person to stumble onto my little collection." Her heart stopped. Jason took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Sarah. "I've got more victims, stockpiled, hidden throughout the building. They're not dead yet, but they will be soon. I've been careful, meticulous. I've been keeping my profile low, keeping the right distance from people. No one ever suspects the quiet ones." The casualness with which he spoke about his horrific acts made Sarah want to scream. But it wasn't just the words, it was his demeanor. He wasn't nervous, wasn't worried. He was calm, even a little proud. "I've been getting away with this for so long," Jason continued, his voice colder than ever, "because nobody ever looks at the guy who stays inside, who never talks to anyone. I've been living right under your noses, Sarah, and now you know." Sarah's stomach churned. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if she were drowning in the horror of Jason's words. The thing that terrified her the most wasn't just what he had done, it was how normal it all sounded to him. The way he spoke about it as though it was just another hobby. But Sarah wasn't about to let him win. She had to act. She had to get Lily out of there. Jason's smile widened, sensing her desperation. "It's too late, Sarah. You should have stayed away." But Sarah wasn't done yet. The room felt like it was closing in on her, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Not for herself, not for Lily, and not for all the other victims Jason had taken. Just as Sarah was about to untie Lily and pull her out of the chains, she froze. Jason's voice came from behind her, low and almost playful, like a predator taunting its prey. "You think I didn't know you'd come for her?" he said, his tone smooth, chilling. "You're predictable, Sarah. I've been waiting for you." A cold sweat dripped down Sarah's neck as she turned around to face him. Her stomach churned with disbelief. He knew? He knew she would come? I've been following you, Sarah. Every step, every phone call you made. I even planted those little clues, those whispers about Lily talking to me, those odd noises coming from my apartment. You thought you were outsmarting me, didn't you? Her heart pounded, each beat echoing in her ears. Her mind raced. How could he have planned all of this? How long had he been watching her, knowing she'd be desperate enough to risk everything for Lily? Suddenly, the entire basement seemed to shift beneath them. A deep rumble vibrated through the floor, and the walls groaned. Sarah's eyes widened in panic. What the hell is that? Don't worry, Sarah, Jason said, his grin widening. You won't be alone for long. The ground shook harder now, the walls cracking as though something was moving underneath them. The muffled noise grew louder, the scraping of metal against stone, the desperate groans of someone or something trying to break through. The basement was alive with an energy Sarah couldn't understand, but it felt wrong. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and she could hear the sounds of chains dragging, a soft, wet shuffle. Her skin prickled with the overwhelming sense of danger. Who else is down here? Sarah whispered, barely able to form the words. But Jason only laughed, a dark, sinister sound that sent chills down her spine. You'll find out soon enough, he said, his voice dripping with malice. But for now, it's just us. Just as Sarah was about to make a move, a loud bang echoed from the far side of the building, followed by more bangs. The door above the basement stairs burst open, and Sarah's heart jumped into her throat as she realized what was happening. The police had arrived, but Jason's expression remained eerily calm, like this was all part of the plan. You think the cops will stop me? They'll never find what they're looking for in time, he sneered. The building's too old, the room's too hidden. By the time they find their way down here, it'll be too late. And with that, he took a step toward her, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling confidence. I'll take care of this. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Before Sarah could react, Jason lunged at her, his hand gripping her arm with a force that made her gasp. His other hand shot out, grabbing a knife from a nearby table. It happened in a blur. Sarah kicked, screamed, and fought, her mind racing as her survival instincts took over. She used every ounce of strength she had, slamming her knee into his stomach and knocking him back. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. But Jason was fast. Too fast. He regained his footing in an instant, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw the madness in his eyes, the same twisted look he had when he spoke of the terror he'd fed off of. He wasn't just trying to kill her, he was trying to break her. With a snarl, he lunged again, but this time, Sarah was ready. She grabbed a nearby piece of broken metal from the floor, a rusted pipe, and swung it at him with every ounce of desperation in her. The blow hit him in the side, sending him crashing into the wall. For a brief moment, he stumbled, and Sarah grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her as hard as she could. We need to go! Now! Sarah shouted, her breath ragged, her pulse hammering in her ears. But Jason wasn't done yet. With a roar of fury, he charged toward them, faster than Sarah expected. She shoved Lily forward, barely dodging Jason's outstretched hand as it tried to grab her. The basement door was right there, but the rumbling had grown worse, the whole building shaking as if something in the ground was trying to break free. And then, crash. The door burst open from the outside, and the police swarmed in, just as Sarah made a desperate dash for freedom. They had made it out of the basement, but they weren't safe yet. Jason's voice echoed down the hallway, sending another wave of fear through Sarah's veins. You'll never get away, Jason screamed, his voice almost drowned out by the sound of sirens and pounding footsteps. I always get what I want. But this time, Jason had underestimated Sarah. She wasn't running from him anymore. She wasn't running from the nightmare. She was running toward freedom, and she wasn't going to stop until she had Lily safe. The race for survival had only just begun. As Sarah and Lily finally stepped into the daylight, the weight of what had just happened hit them both. They were free, physically, but not emotionally. They'd escaped Jason's nightmare, but the scars would last a lifetime. Lily was quiet, her face pale and hollow, as if she still couldn't fully comprehend the horrors she'd endured. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, her own heart still racing, every muscle in her body tense from the terror they'd just survived. The police arrived moments later, and Sarah explained everything, everything she could remember. They scoured the building, the basement, Jason's apartment, but there was nothing. No sign of the man who had terrorized them. No trace of the basement where Lily had been kept. It was as though the place had been scrubbed clean, like it had never been touched by anything sinister. Jason's apartment was empty. Too empty. There were no bloody stains, no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest that a horrific crime had taken place within those walls. The only thing that remained was the faint, lingering smell of decay that seemed to haunt the corners of the room, as though something evil had once lived there and was now gone. Sarah stared at the empty apartment in disbelief. She turned to the officers, but their faces showed only confusion. They'd searched everywhere, but they found nothing. No evidence. No Jason. The last shot lingered on Jason's vacant apartment door, the silence thick and unsettling. Had Jason really escaped? Or was he still out there, watching, waiting for his next victim? And worse yet, was he already watching Sarah? If you loved that twist, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more spine-chilling stories that will keep you up at night. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the real horror is what's hiding in plain sight.